Welcome to Empowered Kids Village Talk. Tonight, we're talking all about helping our kids deal with the anxiety caused by the pandemic. Welcome to Empowered Kids Village Talk. You're here because you know that every family has the potential to be great, and you're willing to push the boundaries of your mindset so that you can create the family of your dreams. Tonight, we have an amazing guest speaker on. It's Dr. Maryhan Baker. And Maryhan is an experienced psychologist and parenting expert, as well as a mother of two. For over 15 years, she has been supporting children, teens, and young adults struggling with low confidence and anxiety. Maryhan, welcome to Village Talk.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right, we have a tough question, and it's all related to the pandemic. So this is from Susan, and Susan writes, my 12-year-old has been very anxious since COVID. He was brave and adventurous boy before. Now he has bad dreams, is afraid of going out and of being at school, and started to be afraid of the dark, which has never been a problem for him before. I can see his anxiety getting worse, and I'm not sure how to help him deal with it all. Can you help?
Absolutely. Can I just explain? This is the easiest way that I can explain anxiety to parents. So I want you to imagine, because what can be really difficult as parents sometimes is that you see this child who has been monumentally adventurous and brave and able to deal with all sorts of challenges, suddenly struggling with things, and it's really difficult to know. So the first thing is about, if you understand what's happening, you can then help explain it to them. So the easiest way I find to explain it is, if you can imagine a seesaw. When your son is doing something that he feels confident in, that he's not worried about, this seesaw is in balance. What he perceives are the demands being placed on him by a particular task that he's doing or an activity is equally matched by what he perceives are the resources he has to manage it. When we get a child who's anxious, who's overwhelmed, who's stressed, who's not feeling confident, the seesaw tips. And what they perceive are the demands being placed on them by a situation is far outweighed than the resources that they feel that they have within them to deal with it. And it's all to do with perception. It's not about what we think, it's about how our children are responding in the moment. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to help our children understand that it's okay to worry. It's a normal part of growing up, of being a child, of being an adult. Is let's normalize it and let's explain to them this idea of this seesaw. So when we talk about perceived demands, there's two bits to helping and supporting a child who worries. The first part is helping them understand the physiological response, so the things that happen in their body. So talk to them about, when you worry, where is this showing up in your body? Typical symptoms might be an increased heart rate. Their heart might be pumping so fast, so hard that it feels like it's beating out of their chest. They might have sweaty palms. They may complain of a tummy ache. They may have what I call jelly legs or hands, so their hands start to quiver. But helping them understand what's going on in their body helps normalize it. It's okay that that's your body. That's the trigger. That's your body saying to you, it's your body's alarm system saying there's something wrong. There's something I'm worried about. And then helping them understand. That's one side. That's the resources side of their seesaw. And then the other side of the seesaw is helping them understand the internal dialogue, the chatter that we all have. This is so scary. What's going to happen? I'm worried. I can't cope with this. It's going to be too difficult. What if this happens? What if that happens? Because if they can recognize that internal chatter, they can begin to question whether that chatter is true. Does that help in things a bit more?
It does. And I love that. I love that you're breaking it down and not omitting the body. So for me, what I love about that response is that it takes into consideration the whole being, the whole child, what it feels like within me, also what's happening within here, because that really just triggers a spiral effect. So take us through, if we were to have this 12-year-old boy kind of work out what's happening with him, how we would have that conversation.
Okay, one of my this is my standard phrase, and I love this particular phrase because it comes across in a way. Sometimes our children can act a bit defensively when we want to have a conversation with them about something. So this is my standard patter. Start with, I've noticed that. Have we got the name? I don't suppose we've got the name of this child, so I'm just going to make a name up.
We don't have their name, no. We only know it's a 12-year-old boy.
So I'm going to call him David. Yeah. I've noticed, David, that recently you're finding things quite hard. You're worried at night. You're finding it more difficult to do things that you ordinarily would have done without thinking about. So you're starting it from it's non-accusatory, it's non-naggy. It's just simply, I've noticed that. And actually, it's perfectly reasonable at the moment to be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, and that's okay. And then talking through them and actually explaining to them what might be going on. So one of the things that happens when we begin to feel overwhelmed and worried is that we tend to find we have these sensations in our body, and that's our body's way of saying things don't feel quite right. And I know, so you talk about it from your perspective, I know when I get nervous about things, so when I have to stand up at work and I have to give a talk, or when I've got a big deadline, or I'm worried about something that might have happened to my friends, I find that it tends to show up in my body in these sorts of ways. For you, it may be different. And then talk through how they might notice things in their body. And you can do it lots of different ways. You can have a verbal discussion with your child. If it's a 12-year-old, you probably could have that. But to be honest with you, even when I'm working with 19, 20-year-olds, I still draw. So I draw a gingerbread man, give them some Post-it notes. Draw some crosses, put some Post-it notes. Where do you feel it in your body? Where does it show up for you? And then talking it through, because we want to help them understand that it's a perfectly normal response. Because actually, if they've never experienced that before and their heart's beating out of their chest, it's not uncommon for children to feel that they're having a heart attack or something. There's something seriously wrong. Yeah. So that's how I would start it. And I find that I've noticed that is quite an easy way in.
I love that, Maryhan. I think it's so challenging for a lot of families at this time, because even as adults, some of us are lapsing into that anxiety. And so it's a struggle in terms of how do we navigate, how do we model for our children what it looks like to really lean into our own anxiety, to process it and come out on the other side feeling stronger and more confident that we're capable of managing whatever comes up. And so I want to take it that next step further. So we've had the conversation. Do you have any tools that you can share in terms of how do we as adults, but also how do we help our kids navigate how to be able to deal with the anxiety once they've identified it?
Okay, let me talk. I'm going to talk you through a strategy for both sides of the seesaw, because the best way is when the seesaw tips, you really should address both sides. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, the easiest side to start work first with is the physiological response, because children get quick wins here. We can get absolutely quick wins, and then we can work on the internal chatter. The internal chatter is harder, as we know as adults, because of the stories that we tell ourselves in our mind all of the time. So I would say, and I genuinely, I say this with love, those in my groups understand, no, I say this with love, but we have to also be very mindful that our children are more likely to do what they see than what we say. So we need to be mindful of how we take care of ourselves as well. So these strategies we can use for us too. So there are two strategies that I use that are my absolute favorites. I have looked at all sorts of breathing techniques. What we're basically looking at doing with a physiological response is trying to help our children come down from the standing alert, which is our fight or flight, and helping our children then go back to what we call rest and restore. And I've tried lots of different breathing techniques and trying to control breathing. And I found the one that works the most effectively is one where you count your breath. So you're not asking your child to change their breathing. You're simply asking them to count it. So you would basically start it on that basis of explaining to your child, if they were to lie on their back and to place a cushion or a cuddly toy on their chest, As they breathe in and out, their chest would rise and fall. And all this is about is counting the rise and fall, but only ever counting as far as 10. So what they do is they just breathe normally. And then as they breathe in, they count 1. As they breathe out, they're counting 2. The next in-breath becomes 3. The next out-breath is 4. Next in-breath is 5. Next out-breath is 6. Then 7, 8, 9, and 10. And it's a really simple mechanism, but it is the most highly effective strategy I have ever used with children. And what I would say is, for an older child, they can just simply do that. And I suggest that they do them in 3 rounds of 10. So ultimately they're doing 30, but they only ever count to 10. A child is never going to use a technique like this in a situation where they feel overwhelmed if they haven't practiced it when they're feeling calm. So my advice is always that they practice it at nighttime before they go to bed. So they're just lying in bed. Often, if you've got a child who's anxious, one of the things that you will notice is that they're probably struggling to go to sleep anyway. So this is a really, really helpful tool. So that is what I would do in terms of a helpful tool to help with the breathing side. So that's the resources side of our seesaw. When we're looking at the internal chatter, it's helping them recognize that actually we're having conversations with ourselves all the time, constant chatter. And it's being able to recognize that on one side, we've got the chatter of what I would call your inner critic, the I'm not popular enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not clever enough, I'm not whatever it is enough. I can't do this, it's too hard, it's difficult. So recognizing that they have that chatter of the inner critic, but they also have the chatter of the voice of their best friend, their best self, and that they're actually their cheerleader. And that isn't a voice that is unrealistic and says, oh my goodness me, you're so incredible, you can do this. But it's the side that says, I know it's hard, but you've been in similar situations before and you've managed it. You've been okay. I know it's hard, but you've got your friends here with you and they're going to be here to support you, and you've got your family close. So the next part, and I do recognize this is more tricky, but it's about talking through with your child. What is that internal chatter? What are the things that they tend to say? And then take that and say, okay, if your best friend came up to you and said that to you, what would you say to help them? What would be the counter? What would be the flip side of that? And then turn those sayings, the things that your best friend would say, your cheerleader, the voice of your best self, and make those mantras. I know it's hard, but I can do it. Tomorrow is another day. Things won't be this way always. Whatever that might be, and make them part of that internal dialogue so they preempt it rather than react to it.
You know what I love about that, Maryhan? So I also have a 12-year-old little boy, and in our home, anxiety has been probably off the charts for us through this pandemic than ever before. And that's because just leading into the pandemic, we lost my 12-year-old niece a few days after having a vaccination. And the whole point for my 12-year-old was a shift in his paradigm, because he said to me, I didn't know that kids could die. I knew mummies and daddies could die, but I never knew that kids could die. And I think coming then into a pandemic where it was health related and anybody in his family could then get sick. And also with talk that the way out of the pandemic is by the use of a vaccine, it's just brought up a lot of things for a 12-year-old. And it's huge. And I mean, dealing with the grief alone was one thing, but then adding this anxiety on top of it is it's a whole nother ball game. And I think what has really helped us get a little headway is that conversation about the inner chatter. And while I think it did 2 things. One, it gave him an opportunity to pour out in a safe space where he realized it was okay to have those feelings and those thoughts. Nobody thought he was crazy. Nobody thought something was wrong with him. So all the things that he might have been saying in his mind for feeling this way, it was okay. So that was the first thing. But I think the second thing was I took it as an opportunity to remind him of all the things he had gone through in his life that he had overcome. Even things that he wasn't aware of, things that happened to him as a baby and as a toddler, showing him how it's not just his skills, but there's a support system around him that sometimes he doesn't take notice of because it's always there, but it's there and it's working to protect him and to keep him safe. And that was the first time throughout this pandemic that I saw him relax and just ease into the fact that, okay, maybe I'll be okay. Maybe there is something looking out for me. Maybe I do have the skills to take care of myself. So I love that conversation about inner chatter.
And it's so important because that internal chatter is with us for our whole life. We're having it as adults.
I remember when I was a little girl, I used to think that I was crazy because I had so many voices. I'm like, don't tell anyone, just don't tell anyone. I love this, Maryhan, and I think so I'm just want to recap. So the tips that we gave to Suzanne was, first of all, help your kids understand that it's okay to be worried. I really love that because I think we all just need to have that safe space where how we feel is okay.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with the fact that we feel how we feel. I also like that you're talking about talk about what worry looks and feels like within our body. Where is it? I usually ask my kids to give it a color. If they had to give it a face, what kind of expression would it have? So like they really get intimate in describing the feeling wherever it is in their body. Yeah. I also like that you talk about helping kids understand that internal chatter, because I think for most kids, they're left alone with that. There really isn't a conversation about what you're thinking and how that thought pattern might be swirling you down into a rabbit hole. So for me, this is pivotal in helping kids.
Yeah.
And then you also shared about how to have that conversation. Share that you've noticed. Share it in a non-judgmental way, in a way that says, I am a safe space that you could lean in. And I think that's really important for parents. And then the tips around how to deal with the anxiety itself. So looking at the breathing techniques, as well as discussion around the internal dialogue. For me, those were golden tips. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, and I think it's just also just being aware that this too shall pass. It's my most favorite saying. It will, as long as we keep the communication going and helping our children understand that these are cycles, these are waves that they go through. And actually, if you keep that dialogue open, if you keep them understanding and normalizing it, they will work through it. It won't always be this way.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Maryhan, and helping with this question. All right, everyone. Remember, this is Weekly Show, and be sure to share it. If you found value, share it with your family and friends, and do subscribe if this is your first time to our channel. It still takes a village, and as we always say here, you're just one connection away. With love and gratitude and powers, until next time.